you're not welcome here.
I'm not gonna leave until I finish asking my questions, all right?
Then I'm gonna have to...
The movie begins with several members of the SWAT team being reunited after completing a mission. They are James, Cliff, Sam, and Walter. They've also brought their wives and girlfriends into the community. One of these women is Stacy, a well-known journalist and an old friend of James. While James is chatting with Stacy, his older brother, Walter, receives a phone call. Walter looks panicked and, keeping the phone to his ear, storms into the house. James follows him inside and asks, out of curiosity, what was really going on, but Walter replies that everything was fine and that he'd sort things out himself. In the evening, just as James is relaxing, his cell phone rings. It's Walter's wife calling to tell him that Walter has died. He immediately rushes to Walter's house. He sees that his brother has been shot in the back of the head. On his return home, James receives a call from Cliff, who begs him to come to his house quickly as he is in danger. He immediately rushes to Cliff's house, but unfortunately arrives too late. Cliff has been stabbed to death. He checks Cliff's cell phone and finds a message from a certain Bill O'Brien. After that, he continues to search Cliff's apartment, but on entering a room, he is ambushed. Fortunately, James is able to turn the tables and defeat the man. He then interrogates him to find out who he is and who he works for, but the man won't open his mouth. James shoots him in the leg and asks him again without further ado, but he curses him. James finishes him off, realizing that he's not going to get anything out of him. After that, he meets his best friend, Lieutenant Ross, who was also Walter and Cliff's boss during the war in Afghanistan. He tells him that now they're dead, but Ross only advises him to do nothing and leave the investigation to the police. Burned by revenge, James ignores Ross's advice. He will continue to take ruthless revenge on Walter and Cliff's murderers. Then he asks Ross if he knows anyone named Bill O'Brien. It turns out he does. He was one of his men in Afghanistan. He also joined the war with them. Just as James was about to go home, Cliff's cell phone suddenly rang. The caller was Bill O'Brien, but when he picked up, the call was disconnected. He becomes increasingly convinced that O'Brien had something to do with Cliff and Walter's deaths. Meanwhile, a businessman named Ted Bomer hires top hitman Ray to track down the stolen $40 million. He asks Ray to go and see Lieutenant Ross first to begin his search. He immediately goes to see him and asks who stole the money. He replies that the culprits are none other than Walter and Cliff, and that he killed them both. After some discussion, they come to believe that the $40 million is in James's hands. Stacy now visits James at his home. Shortly afterwards, two people come knocking at the door. They claim to be officers in charge of checking the gas in every house in the complex. James lets them in. James already suspected that the two men had been sent to arrest him. His instincts weren't wrong, and after discovering their cover, he neutralized them both with Stacy's help. Ross learns from the news that the two people he had sent had been killed by James. James then hacks into military databases to find information on O'Brien. He manages to find his address. He calls Sam and asks him to be vigilant. That evening, James arrives at O'Brien's empty house, but soon afterwards, he spots suspicious people about to sneak in. But once again, thanks to his military skills, he manages to kill them all. After this incident, Ross and Ray start thinking about how to kill James efficiently and get the money back. To make matters worse, they still don't know where the money is. To force him to reveal the location of the money, they devise a plan to take Sam into custody. In the afternoon, James joins Sam in the search for O'Brien. But before he leaves, Sam has an urge. As soon as he enters the bathroom, a man armed with a syringe follows him. Fortunately, before the man can plunge the needle into the back of his neck, James steps in and stops him. He then asks him who he works for, but he replies that his boss would certainly kill his family if he told him. Without giving him another chance, James injected him with the syringe. After that, James, having obtained some information from his military friends, went to a bar that O'Brien must have frequented. O'Brien himself was there, but when he asked about O'Brien, the people in the bar told him to leave. He followed their orders. He left, but after beating up some of them. O'Brien leaves the bar and gets into his car, but James was waiting inside and points his gun at his head. He asks him what connection he had with Cliff and Walter. The latter simply replies that he was their friend. That's when it all makes sense. O'Brien recounts how, while serving in Afghanistan, Lieutenant Ross invited him to take part in an illegal drug smuggling operation between Afghanistan and America by inserting them into the bodies of soldiers who died on the battlefield. Cliff and Walter were forced to take part in this operation. All three really wanted to get out of this illicit mission, but Ross forbade them because they had brought 2 people involved. They were forced to continue the illegal operation until the day they stole all the money from the operation as evidence of the crime. Hearing O'Brien's story, James asks to be taken to the place where he conducts his operations. That evening, James, O'Brien, and Sam go to the warehouse. They enter while Sam stands guard in the car. One by one, James knocks out the guards outside. Then he and O'Brien sneak inside and split up to search for evidence. After a while, James manages to find a pile of drugs ready for distribution in America. Unfortunately, O'Brien is surprised by one of Ross's men and shot dead. Hearing the shots, James doesn't take his eyes off the direction of the sounds. Finally, he finishes off the person who killed O'Brien with a single shot. At the same time, Ross arrives with the rest of his men. They grab poor Sam from the car. Ross and some of his men then enter the building to arrest James, and a shootout ensues. Fortunately, James manages to get out of the warehouse. In the middle of the night, one of Ross's men leaves the building and returns home. Unbeknownst to him, James has followed him home. He approaches the bald man and asks him who Ross had sent to execute Walter. James threatens the man that if he doesn't tell him, he'll kill his family. Frightened, the man finally answers that the man who executed Walter is Hammond, Lieutenant Ross's right-hand man. Having got what he wanted, James shoots the man in the head. The next day, Ross calls James and offers to exchange Sam for the $40 million. James doesn't know where the money is, but accepts the offer nonetheless. Unfortunately, Ross breaks his promise at the exchange. His men finish Sam off, and before James can react, they shoot him too. James is taken to a place where he is tortured. The person torturing him claims he is Hammond, the man who killed Walter. He also sees Ray, someone he knew when he was a soldier in the Special Forces. He didn't expect Ray to become a hitman. Ray asks James where the stolen money is, but James still won't tell him. Ross's men then show him Walter's wife, who has been taken hostage, causing James to panic. He immediately admits that he knew nothing about the money. He only pretended to know because he wanted to save Sam. Moments later, Ross arrives at the front of the building and his men rush to greet him. James takes the opportunity to free himself from his bonds. When Hammond returns, James ambushes him. He hits Hammond with a block of wood and kills him. He then comes face to face with Ray and Ross. Ray simply tells him that being a soldier only makes his life miserable. There are no rewards or money after risking your life on the battlefield. After they've finished laughing at each other, they shoot each other. Ray then hides, looking for an opportunity to shoot James and let Ross escape. A gunfight ensued, but in the end, James shoots Ray in the chest. After that, James pursued Ross, who tried to escape. The chase finally ended after he managed to corner him. This time, Ross has to confront him. But in the end, James succeeds in killing Lieutenant Ross, avenging his brother's death.